Sequel number 22, the last one of this week, the week that has made us aware of what followed the martyrdom of the Uganda Christians. And as we conclude this week, we are going to observe and see how Mapeera died, and also look at the arrival in Buganda of Bishop Alfred Tucker. In March 1890, the Muslim forces made a surprise attack on Buganda from Bulemeezi and Bunyoro, and Mwanga was very worried that he had to flee to Bulingugwe Island. The civil war resumed. Remember, this is still in 1890. This was a very big surprise because the attackers were so strong. The Muslims crossed over from Bulemeezi and entered Chagwe County and completely took it over. And remember, Chagwe was now the food basket, and also that's where the Navy of Buganda constructed their boats. So even the Navy was caught unawares. However, Pokino was informed, and Pokino was Gabriel Chinto, immediately sent forces through Singo, and they were able to enter Chagwe and neutralize the new attackers. Apolo Kaggwa was, however, injured. I don't know why this Katikiro used to fight from the front. Yeah, so he was injured in his armpit, and it was instead Zakaria Kizito Kisingiri who took over the command of the Anglican military faction, and the war, therefore, to defeat the Muslims was able to be concluded. Now, the Muslims, of course, again fled, having left a small corridor, and Rashid Kalema, who had reached Nansana, had to reverse and run away. A corridor was left for him to run away. An epidemic of smallpox had befallen the country, and that's what killed Kalema. As he flew back to Bunyoro in the April of 1890, Kalema collapsed and died, having suffered from smallpox. So he did not die from the effects of the war, but from smallpox. Then on the 12th of May 1890, Father Mapeera, old Father Lodeo, also died, and this was at his Rubaga mission. The young father was only 37 years. He had started to get weak in early 1890, but when his ailment failed to improve, he appointed Father Alphonse Brad, with the blessing of the Bishop Heath of Nyanza in Kavirondo, to succeed him. Father Simeon Lodeo's health deteriorated. As a matter of fact, Mwanga the Kabaka was told, because remember the Kabaka was very close to this Roman Catholic Church. The Kabaka did not waste any time, because he headed straight to the Rubaga mission on the 12th of May, where he found Mapeera already dead. Mapeera had died at 10 minutes past 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the body was already in the hands of Father Camille Denoite and Father Alphonse Brad. A momentous funeral took place, and Mapeera was first buried at the Nabunya Crossroad in Rubaga. Why do I say was first buried? Because he was then exhumed, buried in another place where he was also exhumed, and finally today is buried somewhere else. So he has been exhumed twice before being finally put to his resting place, where he rests as of now. Now, when we come to the state of the church in this year of 1890, the Bukesa Hill had a small base, because remember the Kabaka Mwanga had told them to build at the base. They had built a small structure at a spot called Kitesa, and that is where the first grass-thatched church was put on Bukesa Hill. That is if you are not talking about Namirembe. Now we are talking about Bukesa. Sorry, if you are not talking about Natete, we are now talking about Bukesa, which later became Namirembe. Now, it was at the base of the hill in conformity with Mwanga's agreement not to build at the top because of the reasons we had previously. Now, the Reverend Herbert Walker was in charge of the Church Missionary Society since Alexander was to die or died in that year. And he therefore set up what is called the first Mengo Church Council. Because all along we are talking about missionaries. But who are these missionaries? So legally, he formed the Mengo Church Council. And as for who built this church, the architect was Nicodemo Sebwato, a very well-known county chief. And the actual builder or constructor, who was using about 200 men to build that giant hut, was called Absalomu Sweri. So that was the state of Bukesa Hill. And far away in England, Alfred Tucker had offered himself to the Christian Missionary Society, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Most Reverend Benson, had offered him the bishopric of the East African Equatorial Diocese, which he accepted, and he was to become its third bishop. He was consecrated at Lambeth. Lambeth is the palace of the Archbishop of Canterbury, on St. Mark's Day, which was the 25th of April, 1890. And on that very same day, he left England at Port Dover, and he left his wife and his son behind. Now, Alfred Tucker, having known that the two previous bishops did not reach Buganda, was therefore very careful in his moves. For him, he was determined to reach Buganda. And indeed, he was accompanied. He didn't come alone. There was an advance party before him, which was made of missionaries like Beans, Douglas Hopper, Pilkington, Baskerville, and Cotter. Of interest to note was Pilkington, who was only 25 years, and he was an Irish born in Dublin. He joined Christian Missionary Society in 1889. He was a linguistic graduate from Cambridge, and he was also of interest to us to know was that he was not alone. There was also Baskerville, who was only 23 years and a graduate of Marlborough College. So then Alfred also finally arrived at Mombasa. He did arrive on the 10th of May, 1890, and he was received by the advance party, which had arrived earlier. And Baines and Pilkington were not around. They had gone to Chaga. Chaga was in Tanganyika. And Alfred said he found Frere-town with a giant mango tree, or with giant mango trees, tall palms, dotted huts of rescued slaves with their shambas. Also, Frere-town had a school with houses, and it also had a church, and carried out his first ordination as bishop on the 1st of June, 1890 at Frere-town. Remember, I told you Frere-town is on North Coast, on your way to Kilifi. Alfred Tucker then decided to visit Zanzibar first before coming to Buganda. And because, of course, Zanzibar was in the news in England, it was very, very famous. So he decided to go there first. And he was the guest of Colonel and Mrs. Smith. He found Hindus, Banyans, Arabs, Africans, and he was amazed by the narrow streets. Now, he met Charles Stokes. He met Fred Sematimba, Mika. He met Mika Sematimba, who was there with the ivory tusks to get money for Charles Stokes. And he made plans for a caravan to the interior in the next few weeks, maybe about July. Now, he also wrote a letter for Mwanga, which Charles Stokes promised to have delivered. The letter was dated June 1890, in which he wrote that having been called by God to to be the Bishop of the Church of Christ in East Africa, I write to you, desiring to see you. I vow unto all goodwill and kindness in my heart. I desire only your good and the welfare of your people. I am your friend, bringing teachers with me. We believe that you will welcome us. I remain with, and then he wrote Kiswahili, I remain with salams, which is peace, your faithful friend, and he signed Alfred Tucker. Alfred Tucker then returned to Fredericton in June 1890, and he gave them the good news of his visit. Apparently, Great Britain had gazetted Zanzibar as a British protectorate, and it had also gazetted Uganda to be in its sphere of influence. Not a protectorate yet, but to be in its sphere of influence, because remember, a company was looking after it, the Imperial British East Africa. Now, the bishop asked Hill, Dunn, Domit, and Smith to prepare cargo for a July caravan through Tanganyika to Buganda. Now, remember, they were not armed, so they could not pass through the east of Buganda. They were not like Captain Lugan. They were not armed. Meanwhile, the bishop became busy. He began to do ministry along the East African area. And he was confirming, he was ordaining priests, that kind of thing. So finally, the journey to the interior began. And it was a long journey, but Charles Stoke was with them. And Mikase Matimba confessed. He confessed. He told them exactly what was happening in Buganda, how the Roman Catholics had infiltrated and got arms, how they were better equipped, and all this Mikase Matimba was able to tell to the missionaries. So they were able to know that where they were going into Buganda, things were not easy. Things were not easy at all, so they began to prepare for an uneasy situation. Although somehow Tucker's real reason for coming to Buganda was, of course, to make a record that for him he was able to reach, but more importantly, to see the area, meet Mwanga, and then go and mobilize more missionaries to come to East Africa. Mwanga, with his people accompanying him, did not only travel, but they kept on doing ministry. They would reach places and they would confirm the Christians who they would found there, who missionaries had been preparing. So they would confirm them. And therefore, they were able to arrive on the 4th of December, 1890. The Bishop Alfred Tucker left Busambiro in Tanganyika with Hooper, Pilkington, and Baskerville, and using the boat, they sent Reverend Walker, who reached Bukoba on the 17th of December, and then they sailed to Sese Island. They then split, and Hooper led the group through Entebbe port, while Bishop Alfred Tucker, his group, passed through Munyonyo, arriving on Saturday, the 27th of December, 1890. Now, this was a very big surprise, because Lugard had arrived the previous day, and now Bishop Alfred Tucker is arriving the following day. You can imagine what went through the head of Mwanga. So on Saturday, the 28th December, Bishop Alfred attended the church service at Namirembe Mission Church, and during the service, men sat on one side and women on the other. The service, which began at 9 a.m., was preceded by a 2-hour teaching class of the fundamentals of Christianity, and the congregation was about 500 people. Then at 9 a.m., a drum was sounded. This was before the service. And A very orderly service, according to Alfred Tucker, began. Now, during the service, there was a gunshot a mile away. But all the adult men immediately sprang to their feet and seized their guns. Can you imagine going to church with your guns? They all rushed out, thinking they were under attack by the Roman Catholic military faction. But they learned that a mission porter's gun had misfired. And so the men returned to the service. Now, these are recorded by Alfred Tucker, because remember, Alfred Tucker did not only write in his diaries, but he also wrote a book. So most of this time we are going to be very rich, quoting from the bishop himself as he conducted the ministry. So on Monday, the 29th December 1890, Bishop Alfred Tucker met Mwanga II. It was a Monday. They met at 9 a.m. They shook hands, and the bishop sat on a chair carried by his porter on the Kabaka's right hand. That's where the bishop sat. Now, the bishop's feet avoided the royal carpet. Katikkiro Apolo Kaggwa was also around. He sat on a mat on the floor to the left of the Kabaka. The bishop handed over the Sultan's letter. Remember, the Sultan had written a letter introducing these two, but it was written in Arabic, so he could not read it. Kabaka Mwanga could not read Arabic. And since there was no any Arab to translate it, the bishop pulled out the English translation copy. Yeah, he was a clever man. He had ensured that there is a translation. So the missionary, Reverend Gordon, read the English copy as he translated it into Swahili, which Mwanga understood fluently. We shall stop it at this for tonight, and the whole of the next week we shall look at the history of our church after the arrival of the third bishop of Eastern Equatoria Diocese, Bishop Alfred Tucker. I thank God for this week, and may God bless us all.